Hello, everybody, and welcome to uh, Game Masters Under Dark. I forgot our own name for a minute. Where three game masters get together and answer your questions about tabletop RPGs. As always, I'm Will, and this week I'm joined by Matt R. Matt, how are you doing this week?
Doing sick.
Yes. Yes. I hope you are
For the
feeling
first
better.
time ever in my life.
Dun dun dun. And we have Matt H here with us this week. Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. All the people in my house, not so much. But let's hope I stay healthy.
Okay, well, I'm doing all right. Just so Matt R is the only one feeling a little down. We hope you feel better, buddy. But I started school last week and I'm super busy. So, um, you know, new semester, trying to get everything situated. So, yeah. So this week's topic is challenge rating, and we decided to also do random encounters. Why you should do them, how you can use them, why they're beneficial, why they may not be, things like that. So, as a newer dungeon master, um, I've heard mixed things about challenge rating. I will say that. So, anybody who's new, it is a little wonky to try to use. There's a lot of tools out there that'll, can kind of help you. Even the DMG will kind of explain how it's used, but it doesn't work for everybody. So we're going to kind of get into that first. So what exactly is challenge rating for a newer GM? The challenge rating this is straight from the DMG, by the way. It's a guide to a monster's overall power. As a general rule, monsters with a challenge rating higher than a party's level pose a significant threat. They might have abilities that easily outclass the characters, or so many hit points they can wear the characters down, even in a straightforward battle. I will say that when it says the CR is higher than a party's level, that is the average level of your parties. So I think that is very important. If you have, for example, in my game, one of the characters, you guys I think are both level 6, but the character you're running with is level 8. So it throws that average off a little bit. That is also assuming, based off the DMG, a party of 3 to 5. I think 4 is kind of the sweet spot from everything I've seen. But that is what is used. So when you're balancing an encounter, you take however many people you have, whatever their levels are, get the average, and that is, the level or total levels, if you do a bunch of smaller monsters, of monsters you guys, your party should be able to fight. That's odd because, like, I agree with that sometimes if the HP is super high, we've all done that where we've had to adjust things on the fly from an encounter we thought we had, where it can kind of get grindy. But at the same time, I think that depends on the GM and how they're running that fight. The monster can have magic, but if you're not using any of the magic, it may be easier, it may be harder. I think those things kind of play into that. But we'll start for you guys. First question I have is, why do you think you should use challenge rating, if at all? If you don't think you should, obviously, explain that. But why do you think, if any reason, you should use it?
You can go first.
Oh, okay. So I have found that it's helpful for newer DMs, where if you don't really know quite what you're doing when it comes to setting up encounters and stuff like that, it gives a good sort of ballpark of what you should be looking for. Like, a group of monsters with a total CR of 4 and a single monster with a CR of 4. Those are two very different encounters, but it's still sort of in that same ballpark. That being said, even no two creatures with the same CR are exactly alike. Some are a little bit easier, some are a little bit harder, but they all, at least from what I've seen, generally fall around the same difficulty. Um, all bets are off when dice start rolling, but with very few exception, I've seen that a party of 3 to 5, 4 being the average, going up against something that their appropriate level could take on in CR, 95% of the time, it's a challenge, but they still come through. And that's sort of what you want. You never want to set them up for failure. You want to make it a nail biter, but you still want them to succeed and live. And I think that's sort of what CR boils down to. Is it's not a 50-50, this is 100% even with the players. It's they're going to win, but they're going to be stretched to their limits.
Mhm.
Okay. Matt, you're having like kind of a visceral reaction.
Visceral. I don't know if I'd describe it like that. Damn. I don't know. It was like
For the
CR.
listeners only.
CR is still one of the things I struggle with all the time. And I specifically remember a few instances when I first started DMing where I was like, yo, this DM thing is super easy. This is so cool. Just make up things. It's so easy. And then it was the moment where I was like, okay, guys, you guys are fighting specific monster, and they were like, okay, let's do it. And then I realized, wow, that specific monster is about to wipe the floor with them because I don't know what I'm doing. And that's after like reading the book and looking at it, and I'm like, it's the probably the hardest part for me. And I think sometimes it can be the hardest part for a lot of people. So when I look at that, when I look at how it's broken down now, I kind of just look at a few simple key things. I don't really go straight for the okay, this says it's going to be a challenging encounter, so we're going to roll with it. All I look at is their AC, if it's hittable and makes sense based on everybody's hit dice. And so I'm like looking at everybody's dice and just kind of judging, being like, okay, well, if Matt rolls poorly, he will never hit this monster. I'm like, I kind of want something in the middle to give Matt like that option to of course, to hit the damn monster. And so I'm looking at that. I'm looking at the AC. So as like I'm adjusting the monster's CR, I can look at the AC and HP. I can kind of adjust those and be like, okay, does that seem like just a massive pool of health for no reason? That encounter might last forever. And then the final thing I look at is their damage when they do damage, because like you could have, you hit the monster with a 10, that seems fair, sure. And then the HP might be 26, sure, that's cool. That's like a few minutes of an encounter, and then the damage might be like 8d5, or that doesn't exist. Hold on, 8d6. 8d6, and I'd be like, that could kill somebody depending on what level they're at. And so I kind of take in the characters that are coming to the board in account, and I'm looking very closely at what everybody can do. And now, I mean, that's just what making an encounter is. But when it comes to like using something that is the correct CR rating or CR, I don't think there is a correct one. You just gotta kind of look at it, and it's going to be trial and error, I think, for the most part, especially if you're a new DM. It's going to be trial and error until you start realizing, okay, this kind of CR is roughly what I want for this amount of players.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I think based on your players, countering the encounter, I think a lot of that too, CR is tough because like one group of four is not the same as another group of four, if that makes sense. So if you have a bunch like we'll just if you have a group of four that is like all min maxers, they're totally built the way they should be. It doesn't. They can sometimes go above that CR because their character is balanced in a way that makes them super strong.
Mhm.
You could have another group, which I think we fall into this kind of a lot, is we build our characters to flavor our character. So it may not be min max. It's like my character is good at this, so I'm going to be good at this, and there's nothing wrong with that. I obviously we all play that way.
That's when you can fall into a kind of a trap a little bit where you create a seemingly easy CR encounter and realize everybody's just having a good old fun time being a bard and nobody's going to take this hit well.
Well, exactly. And one thing I will say, being new, is I do use the CR quite a bit. I use obligatory, not sponsored D&D Beyond reference. I do use their combat encounter creator, because it does kind of give you those levels based on average level. It kind of does all the math for you. Of course, it is based on a party of four, so sometimes we have that, sometimes we don't. Um, but one thing that I will say that I think would make it easier to judge how to build an encounter is if wizards in any of their books rather, had something that explained how the monsters work. And by that I mean I'm going to reference specifically a book that we've all talked about, and I just bought a couple weeks ago, which is The Monsters Know What They're Doing, or the sequel, More Monsters Know What They're Doing. Um, that book is awesome. I have the first one. I'm hoping to get the second one for my birthday here in a couple weeks. But it explains uh, like based on a monster's intelligence, wisdom, strength, blah blah blah. Like here's how they would fight if they were a real person, basically.
Mhm.
And I've read that book in like even a simple goblin encounter. I'm like, ooh, I know how I can make this interesting now because he explains, the author, whose name I do not have in front of me right now, and I apologize for that. Keith Aman, there it is. He breaks down like here's how they would attack based on their movement, what they have available, blah blah blah. And so I think you can make a low CR goblin encounter super interesting if you know tactically how to use them. And I think that that's something, as a new DM, it can be overwhelming. So I do want to say that because if that's not how your brain necessarily processes things,
Mhm.
it could be a lot. But if I just look at a goblin stat block, I'm like, oh, they're a bunch of dummies who, shoot bows and arrows and try to stab. When really you can do a lot of interesting things with them, especially if they're with
Oh,
a group of, oh,
I'm still here
uh,
and just
uh,
disappeared.
but especially if they're with a group of, say, bugbears. So the bugbears are the tank, and now you've got these goblins flanking, and it can make things really interesting. And I think it would help the CR, judging the CR better if you knew how the monster acted, if that makes sense. Because, like Matt said, not all CR4s are the same. Well, if this CR4 is better at brute strength, well,
Yeah.
maybe your party is a bunch of bards. Let's not use that one.
Yeah. And being a new DM looking at the monster manual, there's a lot of things in there that you just don't know how it works quite yet.
Hmm. Absolutely. So, I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily. I do think it just takes, like you were saying, some finesse and playing and, sometimes play testing.
Mhm.
Like I know at least for me, I have like multiple like test characters, and I've created like a campaign, and I'll go in and play with it, and I'm like, ooh, that doesn't make sense.
Like
Like let's not do that.
example of testing would be like we kind of put together a test in a sort game where we did the whole like if you guys remember the gladiator scene,
Yeah,
remember that we
yeah.
kind of like put that together just to try out like what if I throw this monster at you? As me as a DM, I'd be like, what if I throw this monster at them? How would they react? And And I remember the centipede, the centipede, and I was like, that's weird. They're so weak. We put, like a whole bunch more out there, and then it was the first time they hit somebody. Never mind. That's where it's at. And so like, and then recently I used that giant centipede again, and having done that, the first time I was like, oh, I know kind of roughly how many I want out there to still make this challenging. And Matt recognized right away that like giant centipede, oh, they better not touch me.
Yeah, that one took me a minute. I didn't catch it at first. But yeah, so I think that's a good thing. And I actually want to use an example I found from an old Wizards article. I think it was from like 2014. Matt R. I think I read this to you last week when we first talked about this topic, where they were saying so part of it as well when you use challenge rating is based on the XP earned for the day. A lot of groups don't use XP. We don't. So that's another thing to keep in mind is the CR can be a little misleading that way if you use milestone leveling, because just because you do an encounter doesn't mean you level up. Just because you do 3 encounters doesn't mean you necessarily level up. It's called, you have a specific thing that you're reaching for to get the level up. But I want to read this example because I think it captured it really well. So it says a creature with a CR higher than the party's level might easily fit into the XP budget for the day, but such a creature could present a deadly threat to the party. And the example they use is an ogre is worth 450 XP and is a CR2 threat. So it's challenge rating of 2. A party of 5 first level characters should expect to face about 500 XP worth of monsters for a challenging fight. So it sounds like the ogre is a good fight, right? And then they go on. However, the ogre is only a challenge rating 2 creature because his damage is enough to drop most first level characters in a single hit. That doesn't mean you shouldn't ever throw an ogre at a first level party, but it does mean you should be ready for a tough fight, one that requires a mix of good luck and smart play for the heroes to emerge victorious. So I really like that example because, spoiler alert, if you're a new DM and didn't know this, ogres don't like fire. But if you're a new party and say you've never played D&D and you're like, an ogre makes sense. If you don't have fire damage, he's going to actually keep regenerating health, and that's going to be a problem. Or no, that's not an ogre, that's a troll. But
It is a troll.
I caught myself there. But hey, I can make an ogre like that if I want. My game, my rules, right? Maybe it's a half troll.
They both fall into the giant category, so
Right. But the point still stands in that a troll could be very dangerous for a low level party, even if you have 5, 6 characters. So that's why a lot of times I look at how, like, thematically, like, you guys kind of know what you're getting in my game because it's a demon campaign. So you guys kind of know what you're getting. But that doesn't mean I can't spice it up with multiple different ones. And again, the book is Monsters Know What They're Doing is great because there's a specific monster I want to throw at you guys coming up soon, but it's got spells and stuff that I've never used, and I'm like, well, how does this work? And there's like 5 or 6 pages just on this one monster, and I'm like, this makes sense. I can use this. It's part role play. It's part combat.
Sounds like we're gonna die.
You're not.
If
I wouldn't
there's
do you.
5 damn pages.
Well, no, it's just because some of the spells, like there's spells that you don't run across very often, and it's not a monster that's used very often. Like even the page on goblins, it's like maybe a page or page and a half, but it's because it's like people don't think of that creature in that way. Whereas this one is like, this is very rarely used. So here's how all its spells work, and here's how the monster should function based on the situation.
Right.
So
I'm very, very, when it comes to CR, like I've already talked about me like adjusting things to fit the party. I'm very much so in line of like, if the CR just doesn't work, even like mid battle, then I'm just like, well, we're changing things like right now, because like this is not going to be fun. And that's, I mean, I think that's what it boils down to. CR at its face value does not look fun to me. And so I think a lot of people, when they're like looking at D&D for the first time, they're like, this looks fun. They get to that page and they're like, never mind. never mind, actually. And so like I think fudging the numbers um is fine as long as everybody's having a good time. I know in the several encounters that I've played, I wanted the encounter to actually last longer, so the players have technically killed the CR that I've gave them, but I was like, I want them to do something. Like I want the monster to actually do something. And sometimes, I mean, last time you guys just critted everything, and so at one point, at a certain point, you're just like, okay, the players have got to know at this point that this thing's dead. And so there's like almost a level, a cap of realism that you can fudge it to. And but
Yeah.
it's just really, everybody had a good time, everybody killed what they wanted to kill. It was just like, I had to fudge it so I can at least try.
Well, and that's kind of the nice thing too, is that, like you said, you can adjust it on the fly.
Mhm.
Um, I think I mentioned it before, but I know there was an encounter I did with you guys in my like test campaign I did for you guys to help me when I first started,
Mhm.
and I jacked something way up, and I was like, ooh, no, that'll kill him. So I was like, okay, I'll keep. So I kept the HP, but I took like the damage and stuff down. And I was like, okay, that fits better for what I want to do.
Yeah,
And
I've done that.
there's yeah, so and there's tools online that'll help you do that. Like adjust the CR of a monster. So um, if you yeah, there's quite a few, so I'm not going to go over my top, try to go over all of them, but I think they're cool tools to use because they definitely let you mess with a monster pre-combat. In like I know I've written stuff down on like an index card or paper where I'm like, if too hard, change it to this. If too easy, change it to this. You know, just like quick notes for myself so that I can I can make adjustments on the fly. Um, Matt, you got any other thoughts on? I know you've been DM. You guys have both been DMing a while, so you don't use it as much as I do. But any other thoughts on challenge rating?
Um, Sort of the last thing, and something to keep in mind, the way how action economy works in D&D, two two CR creatures is going to be a harder fight than one 4 CR creature. So keep that in mind if you're using CR. The more overall actions that the total amount of enemies have, the harder that encounter is going to be. So
Uh-huh.
just because you have a single creature that's, CR4, uh, does not mean that that encounter is going to be the same level of difficulty if you have, you know, 32 1/8 CR creatures. No, more attacks means more
Hey,
opportunity to crit. So,
swarm.
yeah,
Yeah, I was just
that
saying,
you're using
wish we had
mass
four east.
combat rules,
I wish we still had four east swarm rules.
right?
um, I do. I love going back to older editions and looking. I think we've all talked. I've talked to you guys about them. Like, did you know this was a thing? And of course, you two knew. But I was like,
Hey.
I love these things. Like some of the older rules, I wish they swarm being one of them. I wish they would bring back. But um, with that being said, speaking of encounters, the other thing that I've seen again as a new DM is random encounters, and a lot of people don't like those either. um, and part of me understands it because you're basically putting the CR challenge rating to the test with randomness. Um, D&D is already a game of randomness, and I can see why a lot of people don't like that. Um, but again, I'm going to read this. This is from the DMG because I actually think it makes a lot of sense. So it says, as characters explore a wilderness area or dungeon complex, they are bound to encounter the unexpected. Random encounters are a way to deliver the unexpected. They are usually presented in the form of a table. When a random encounter occurs, you roll a die, consult the table to determine what the party encounters. Some players and DMs view random encounters in an adventure as time wasters. So even Wizards acknowledges this. But it says, yet well-designed random encounters can serve a variety of useful purposes, including creating urgency, establishing atmosphere, drain character resources, provide assistance, add interest, or reinforce campaign themes, which I just talked about with mine. Um, and as an add-on to that, Zenithar's Guide to Everything actually has random tables and encounters by terrain and level. So that's just more of a plus to that. So I definitely agree with that. Like, not every encounter has to, like Matt said, like be a 50-50 or even be like a total party kill. Sometimes you just want to throw a group of, I keep going back to goblins because they're easy, but like a group of low level CR monsters that are maybe humanoid because they have potions on them. And maybe maybe your party forgot to buy potions. So they loot the bodies and they find potions. That's providing assistance. Or, you know, maybe they haven't been challenged in a while and you want to make, because of the amount of resources they have, the next fight will be super easy. So you throw something big at them and now they have to use those healing potions or antidotes or whatever it is. So I agree with those premises. But I don't know about using random encounters to do that. Myself, what do you guys think? I know I'm personally in the I can just create an encounter that will do that camp. But what do you guys think?
Tend to use random encounters not during play. When I'm thinking of what I'm going to do in a session, hours, days before we play, that's when we use a random encounter just to kind of give me that random idea. And then I'll flesh it out a lot more. So it doesn't seem like a random encounter done randomly. I'm not just like, oh, it says 4 wolves here. So there's four wolves in front of you now. Like I don't like that. And so I try to put a little bit more depth into it. And for me to do that, I just need more time. So for a random encounter, what I'll do is use it in the prep stage of creating a session, and then like, does that work? Okay, yeah, I can make that work, and I make it seem not random. And so when it comes to play, it's just part of the game now. It's just a normal encounter. I wouldn't consider it random at that point, but I use it almost as a tool to help me build the session.
Okay, I never thought about doing that before. That actually seems like a really good idea. Matt, what about you? What do you think?
The way how I use random encounters is sort of like what Matt says, where I roll most of mine before I even play. The way how I use them normally is there is a story beat or a section in a dungeon or whatever like that where I know combat is going to happen. I just don't know what to put there, is my thing. Like, you're going into an abandoned dungeon to find, a magic sword, whatever. Obviously, if you're going into a dungeon with magic items, you're probably going to fight something in there. And, if my brain hits a wall and I'm just like, gosh, what am I going to put there? I can't just have them walk into this cave and just be like, oh, behind door number 1, boom, magic sword, the end, time to leave the dungeon. I'm like, what am I going to put there? So will it be, centipedes, skeletons, hobgoblins? That's when I would roll on the random encounter table. And from what I've seen and from how I use it is I can't help myself from wanting to dig deeper. Whenever I use them, I'll roll something up and I'm like, okay, I rolled hobgoblins. They're guarding the sword. I'm like, but why are they guarding the sword? And then I go down this rabbit hole, which ends up becoming an entire 5-session arc because I just happened to roll on a D8 encounter table that a D12 of hobgoblins are going to be here. And now it has far-reaching ripple effects in the entire campaign because I couldn't decide whether I was going to put skeletons or giant fire beetles down there, and I just happened to roll hobgoblins, and now we're here. That's how I use them. That's how my brain works. I'm not sure if everybody does that. Maybe I'm just a little off, but it works for me.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of
yeah.
back to like old school D&D was probably the most sandbox you're gonna get. Where it's very much whatever you want to do, we're gonna go do it. Here comes the random encounter, and you like I feel like a lot of stories are built off of that. Like how Matt, you're saying, like people just cling to what they like, and then like things changed a little bit to where like stories, like an overarching multi-session story started becoming like more common, and that's when like random encounters kind of became for some players just kind of a nuisance. So for me, as somebody who does really like that overarching plot, I don't ever try to make the random encounter like really part of the plots. Like it's really just like almost like a gate, and you gotta open it to get through the rest of the plot.
Yeah, I actually I've never used a random encounter table. I've looked at a bunch of them. You know, people have them all over the internet. Uh, I mentioned Xanathar's Guide. I obviously own that. It's even in the Essentials kit, which is good for beginners. But there's a section in there that every time you leave a location, you roll a table to see where the big bad is. I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't played it. And it's like, but why? Like if your characters, because the way it works is if your characters meet that thing the first time out, they're gonna die.
Right.
Like so that the first time I read that, because I bought the essentials and the starter kit together, and I was reading it and I was like, that doesn't make any sense. I was like, that table right there doesn't make sense. But then they had other tables for like, okay, when you leave, depending on how far you travel, because they give you a hex map to kind of judge everything on. It's like if they're going to travel at least this far, there should be one encounter, this far, two encounters, blah blah blah. And I was looking at it, and as somebody who is, as you guys know, a huge planner, probably too much, more often than not, I was like, that gives me anxiety because now I have to have all these monster stat blocks ready. I have to have an encounter built, or at least ready, that guys might not do, and there's like 20 of them. No one wants. So I'm like, for me, I was just like, that's too much for me. I could not. And I'm like, Matt, if I do that, well, why are these people here? It's one thing if it's like a skeleton or zombie, like, but now wait, those are bad. Why are they reanimating? Who reanimated these things? Great. Now I have a mage and a necromancer I have to deal with. Thank you. So it's a lot of anxiety for me.
That kind of table is like roll to find out where this villain is every time the players do something or whatever. That seems like something that would be very beneficial, like at the beginning of your prep time. So like you roll, find out, and be like, does that work for the session that I've written? Then you can like fudge it from there. But pretty much like, I feel like if players try to do that in game, roll, and maybe it's like right there, and you're just like, well, that just ruins the whole session right now. I just played the whole thing and it's gone now.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think while like I said, wizards acknowledge themselves in the DMG that a lot of people don't use them. I think a lot of how they're presented has to do with that.
I do like hazards, like not necessarily like, oh, here comes a monster. I do love hazards being
like
randomly during play. Like, oh no, here comes, I don't know, freaking frogs raining from the sky. And, and it's like, what do we do?
I found a cool one time for travel that I wish I had saved. This is when I first started like taking DMing seriously, but it was like traps that you could roll into. So like if you're in the road, I always use like the from Pokemon, like Team Rocket, like a hole in the road. Like there was one of those. There was like
See, I like
if you feel
those.
like an investigation, yeah, like if you feel an investigation check, you step the old school like animal trap where like it sling you upside down. Like oh, if you get like a nat one, like whoop, now you're upside down and you got to figure out how to get out of here, or a net drops on you. Like yeah, those kind of tables. I was like, that's really cool. That gives you something to add a little flavor. But
I think in Curse of Strahd in one of the random tables, I think just at the one of them is just like Strahd shows up, and I'm like, oh my god. And that is one of the few games though where like the main baddie is kind of supposed to keep showing up and taunting you. But like if Strahd was like, I don't know, a freaking deadly dragon or something like that, and he just was on a random encounter table and I rolled it, I'd be like, nope. Reroll.
right, and I think that's the hard part is if you're a new DM and you roll for a dragon to show up, you're not. This is gonna. I don't know how if this sounds correct, but you're not gonna know better to not run that encounter.
You're gonna think it's dope.
Yeah, as a new
Everybody's gonna think it's dope until it's the dragon's turn.
right, the first time you guys are grouped together and it does a 15-foot cone breath and everybody fails a deck save and you're all dead on the first turn.
It'll take like 12d8 lightning damage and you're all level 2.
Everybody's
Right.
having a great time.
And it's like and TPK, so we got to start over. And so, but that's what I'm saying. Like as a new DM, you wouldn't know not to do that. You would just run that encounter because yeah, it sounds cool. That was something I learned very quickly from you guys. I was like, I remember asking about it, and you guys were like, you can, use some of the monsters from them, but don't make it random because you need to know what they're fighting. And I obviously I haven't run a ton of combat, but like I know this last time I used something from another adventure, and you guys are like, that was all easy. I was like, yeah, it was supposed to be. Like it was for like 5th level characters. You guys are all like 6 and 8, but you talked your way out of the boss fight because that would have been a level 20 against you 3 with some. And I read you guys the spells. That would have been a hell of a fight. So but you guys were able to talk your way out of it, and everything's cool now. So but that was something I learned from you guys was like, I'm gonna have this here, but combat does not have to be the only option. And again, that's not something that you always learn from. I think Wild Beyond the Witchlight, it says that like it's focused on a lot of non-combat. It even says it in the book, like you can fight, but a lot of the encounters are set up with monsters that have a high enough intelligence that you could talk your way out of
it. It's very unique. It's a very unique book. I do like they make an effort to say that a lot of the monsters actually are smart enough to know that even themselves can probably talk themselves out of this fight. And so fighting is really in the background in that book, Wild Beyond the Witchlight. But it is also a very deadly book because of that, because you're also going up against creatures that normally would be deadly encounters. But the book itself and the narrative is really tooling with the idea like they're going to talk first.
Yeah,
and,
a lot of
and
passive.
they want you to talk first. And if you do want to fight, though, it's just going to be like, okay, well, I mean, look at that stat block. It's going to hurt.
Yeah, and so, but that was something when I haven't read the book, but I remember reading that like from a lot of the reviews, and even us talking about it a little bit. I was like, I like that concept, of you don't have to fight. And so like I've started to incorporate that, and like plus the book, it's opened me up to a lot of things that I think as a DM, you wish that Wizards had a book like that. Like I don't care how thick that book is. If you had a book like The Monsters Know What They're Doing, that explained every monster and how they would react. I don't care if it's like, I see the cat. Is that Bean? Keeps phasing in and out.
That is Lucy.
Oh,
My
it's
cat.
Lucy. Yeah, sorry for those listening. I couldn't tell because she keeps phasing in and out. But even if they had like,
Using blink.
yeah, right. But even if they were like cat, it's a house cat. It'll scratch you. If not, it'll run away. Like if you yell at it. I don't care if it was like for some easier, monsters. It was just something that small, like a sentence. But some of the bigger monsters they had an explanation for, because again, you don't have to read all of it, just the ones that are into what you're using. I think that would make things a lot easier to using Challenger. Or just setting up a random encounter. Even if you wanted to use random encounters and make your own table, you could say, okay, I know how this monster is going to react. That'll work for my party. If they, even if it's a random thing, I know how I can role play, and you can make it work. So, Keith Hayman, again, Monsters Know What They're Doing. Great book. I'm trying, like I said, I want to get the sequel, and he even has a book. I don't know if you guys have seen it on combat tactics for parties, and like how parties can work together.
I have seen that actually. Yeah, that's a cool one.
So that one kind of seems interesting. I might pick that one up too. But I recommend for any new DM, pick the book, or at least the first one, because the sequel has more to do with Volos and Mordenkainen's. So I want the second one. There's a lot of demon stuff in there. I need to go over. But unless but the first one is basically all the the monster manual. So I highly recommend the book. It's great. So that being said, I think we're all in the kind of no random encounters, at least at the table camp. Did you guys have anything else you wanted to add about either challenge rating or random encounters, or even just encounter building in general before we go?
Matt, you got anything?
Well, I'm going to kind of repeat something I said before. Is you're gonna learn as you go, and you're gonna keep learning, and eventually you get to the point where you'll learn that, okay, I know the classes, I know what spells are at their disposal right now. I have an approximate number of how much damage is going to be dealt each round, and that just comes with time. And when you get to that kind of point, that's when things do start to feel easier. So like, just give yourself some credit and allow yourself to fail.
Yes. Yes. Matt, what about you?
So something that I do, and it's from like OG box edition, like first edition D&D, and it's something that I really wish they would bring back. They might have touched on something similar to it, but you could sort of, if you wanted to do random encounters and truly make them random and give yourself a little bit of mental exercise and figuring out how to make a random encounter narratively satisfying or engaging is, I'm not sure if you guys have ever heard about it or have done it. I love using disposition tables for allies and enemies. Pretty much it's 2d6. Snake Eyes is immediately hostile, and a 12 is friendly.
Oh, yeah, I think we talked about this before. Yeah.
Yeah. Using that in conjunction with random encounters, because it would really make it interesting and sort of throw your party off. And it would be something really cool narratively if you rolled like a roaming group of like barbaric bugbears, and you roll and their disposition is like helpful and friendly.
That's right.
And you're like, oh,
Can we help you along the way while we pillage?
so, and it could create some interesting dynamics there. You might roll a random encounter that's not even a combat encounter. That's just like, oh, a merchant's cart's broken down on the road, and you roll disposition, and it's like immediately hostile, and you're like, whoa, why?
Why, right? My
So-
cabbages.
Right?
You adventurers always trying to rob me.
Right. And I mean, it once again, me diving deeper into it, maybe he thinks you're bandits, and you couldn't mean like, oh, if he thinks that we're bandits, they must be having a bandit problem. And it's all about, at least for me, even when I use random encounter tables, is using them more as inspiration tables,
Yeah.
to where if I am at a point where I don't know what to do, I'll roll some dice, and that gives me just enough creative juice to lubricate the old brain cogs to get them turning again. So that's how I use random encounter tables. If you want to try to use them, it works wonders for me. But you do you. You can't run your game wrong. It's your game. So
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, I like I said, I've never even looked at them like that in depth. It was kind of like the first couple I saw, I was like, I don't like this. And I think I made the mistake of judging a book by its cover, because clearly you guys have some other ways of using them. I'm gonna go back and give them a look. Excuse me, and see what makes sense. But yeah, I think in general, just hey, let's roll to randomly fight something in the middle of this adventure. I'm not. I'm not ready. I'm not down for that one.
yeah.
That to loop it all the way back to session 0, like sometimes you just don't even want that. And so
Yeah.
like you just talk to them, and if they want to like if they want to really fight things like all the time, yeah, make a session and use the random encounters, and they'll have fun. And but like if that's not really kind of their cup of tea, then you're just throwing goblins at them for no reason, and they don't get it. They don't get it.
Yeah.
Those poor goblins.
Right.
Right? They got mouths to feed. Um, so yeah, I agree. I think there's some benefit to them. But for random encounters and even CR, they're few and far between. I think definitely for newer DMs, I think use CR to start with. Like we all kind of said, just use it as a gauge, and then once you get more familiar with, like Matt, you said it perfectly. What classes have what abilities, spells, or things like that.
Gauge is a good word.
Yeah, like once you get more familiar with that, it's a little easier to go by things. I think if you use especially online tools, whether it's like Roll20, D&D Beyond, Foundry, all kind of different things, where as a DM you can see your players' character sheets. I think that's been helpful for me. We use D&D Beyond and create campaigns, and there have been times where I've gone into your guys' character sheets because I'm like, what can he do or not do? And it's like, ooh, I wanted to throw something at you guys, and I was like, that would murder you. Like you have no way to counter it because you don't have enough spells, or you know what I mean. And it's like, I'm not trying to murder you guys. Like I'm trying to set up something bigger. Like they said, reinforce campaign themes. Well, I'm not here to murder you. I'm trying to set something up. So if I threw that monster at you, it wouldn't make sense. So I think if you, again, as a new DM, until you're comfortable with that, if you guys are playing in person, it might be a little harder. I know some DMs like collect their players' character sheets so nobody messes with them. I've heard of that being a thing, but sometimes just collect it to learn. You know what I mean? Like you're not trying to necessarily keep anybody from cheating or anything, but like you don't know if you don't look at it.
I
So
used to do that. I used to have Matt might remember those days where I'd give everybody a book, like a whole college rule book, and I'd be like, just that is yours for the session, and we'll just write it in. And I would actually collect those books afterwards and have them leave it at my house, just so I can go through, not necessarily look at what they can do, but watch their little scribbles in the margins and what they remember. And then that's what I'll take back. So if you're in an in-person group and you utilize something like that, pay attention to like the little fun details that they wrote on the side, like, oh, somebody's funny mustache. They remember that funny mustache, and you can bring it up. You can shave it, and then they'll be heartbroken.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to get one over on Matt, having played with him in person. And Matt's like, you can't do that. And it's like, oh, sorry, my bad. It was a mistake. But no, I like to mess with Matt, but that is a good thing. Like Matt does know. So when somebody's like, I'm gonna use like my attack does this much damage, and he's we've talked about just like you know. And so I know, but like I wouldn't know that. You could be like, I do 32 damage at level 2, and I'd be like, yeah, that sounds fine to me. But Matt would be like, no, that's not possible. And that's where just a lot of playing, a lot of running, and like I said, looking at the character sheets, reading. I was gonna say just the player's handbook, but some of the books have subclasses and stuff too. But kind of, if you get time studying those, and the important thing I will say is even if you don't memorize all of it, knowing where to find the answer is just as important. So that's a big thing. You don't have to know it all. You just got to know where to find it.
Yeah.
So that being said, how we appreciate everybody again for listening, watching this first episode of the new year. I am off tomorrow. Today we record on Wednesday, so I should have this thing actually edited and ready to go Friday noon, like our old schedule. I say should because I also have a 2-year-old in school, so I will do my best to get it on time. But as always, we really appreciate everybody that listens and watches. Hopefully this is helping some of you. And we always appreciate your feedback in the comments. If you got questions, you can leave those in the comments as well. And yeah, we hope you guys have a happy Friday and have a good weekend and happy gaming. We'll see you guys next week. See ya.